Well, just as there is every week, a lot going on in the world of politics right now, specifically with the 2024 presidential campaigns in full swing now, but also so much going on Capitol Hill and at the White House. And so joining me is a good friend of CBN News. He's the editor of Inside Elections, and he's a Faith Nation contributor, Nathan Gonzales. Nathan, welcome back to CBN. How are you? Thanks for joining me.
I'm doing well. Hey, anytime John calls to ask me to do this, I am in. I'm in for you.
Well, I appreciate that. That makes my heart sing a little bit there, Nathan. And I did want to start off talking about this meeting between the Prime Minister of India coming to the White House and President Biden. We haven't seen the president do a lot of these kinds of news conferences that he's doing with Prime Minister Modi. It was a criticism of the first couple of years of his presidency. We're seeing it a little bit more now during these last few state visits. And I know that there's been some controversy surrounding the prime minister's visit. I had a guest on earlier in the podcast talking about that a little bit, but just can you get a sense for me what the White House is hoping to accomplish, what the Biden administration is hoping to accomplish with having the prime minister come to Washington?
Well, I think this is an opportunity. This is one of the things that should be good about Washington, meaning Washington gets a lot of criticism, but a state visit is supposed to have the pomp and the circumstance and the press conferences and all the things that go along with it, that it's supposed to be good. There's always politics involved, and it's never quite as clean and simple as that. But I think this is an opportunity for President Biden to show that he is the president, right? There are all of these candidates that are running against him, a couple on the Democratic side, many more on the Republican side. And right now, they don't have the opportunity to look as stately or as official or to be this head of state. Right now, President Biden can do it. And I think that's one of the objectives for events like this.
I want to talk a little bit about the president's son, Hunter Biden. Obviously, the plea agreement that he reached with prosecutors this week. Republicans, I know a lot of House Republicans having a big problem with this. How are they responding? How are Republicans in general responding to the Hunter Biden plea? I mean, I know that there's not just one answer for the whole party.
Well, but in this case, it's a pretty universal that Hunter Biden, this is a slap on the wrist. There are two different justice, forms of justice or justice departments, that this was a very light sentence for him, whereas the DOJ and other courts around the country are holding President Trump to a different standard, to a higher standard. That it's almost universal. It's surprising that there's that level of unity when it comes to a political message. I think some of those things fall apart a little bit when you look at that argument specifically. I mean, this investigation into Hunter Biden did start under the Trump administration, with the Department of Justice and the Trump administration, with a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney. And President Biden chose to keep that U.S. attorney in place in order to, one of the things, to complete this investigation. It would have looked pretty terrible if Biden had come into office, promptly fired the U.S. attorney who was investigating his son. Republicans would be climbing the walls if that. But Biden, I think, to his credit, chose to keep him in place, the U.S. attorney in place, and to complete this 5-year investigation. So, the other thing that Republicans, I think, are conflating some of the things that Hunter Biden was accused of and comparing them to what Trump is accused of, and saying that Hunter got this lesser sentence, but Hunter was not accused of holding classified documents at his house and then refusing to cooperate with the FBI and returning them. These are different cases that we're looking at together.
Well, and along those same lines, too, you're talking about a plea deal here that Hunter Biden agreed to. Generally speaking, when there's a plea deal, there is a negotiation that takes place and a reduced sentence that takes place. And one wonders what would happen if Donald Trump negotiated a plea deal for the criminal counts that he's looking at, or some of the criminal counts. Now, you may have prosecutors that aren't interested in that with the former president, as opposed to with someone like Hunter Biden. But it is fair to say that in a plea deal, generally speaking, the sentences are brought down as a way to entice the defendant to agree to the plea deal.
Right. And we have to, so on one hand, we have to remember that the plea deal in the Hunter Biden case was offered by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney and agreed to by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney. But in the cases with Trump, if he were to agree, if there was a plea deal offered and he would agree to something, that would mean he would have to admit guilt on something, right?
Mhm.
It might be a lesser charge, but he would have to admit guilt. And that is not something that Trump does. He does. I mean, look back over the years of the things he said, going back into his administration. I'm pretty sure some of the only things he has admitted to ever doing wrong was appointing Jeff Sessions as Attorney General or things like that. It's never around the other more serious charges that he is facing or will face, in the case of the Georgia case that is still somewhat unresolved.
So this is the criminal investigation, and I think it's an open question. It seems that Hunter Biden's lawyer isn't. So he believes that the criminal case is over. It sounds as though the prosecutors or the Justice Department is leaving the possibility that the case is open. Do we have any kind of a sense as to whether or not this case is closed now?
I am not clear
Yeah.
that it's completely closed, but again, we can look at this has been going on for 5 years. They were not, they were looking on all sorts of avenues and aspects of this particular case. These are the charges that they brought forward. This is the agreement and the plea deal that Hunter and his attorney agreed to. If there's new evidence, then it should be investigated, right? If there are
Hmm.
new things that come up, Republicans think they have, this tape or that tape or this document, then that would be new, and I think it should. Everyone who is potentially doing something wrong should be investigated. But in terms of what has happened in the past, I would be surprised, coming from a non-attorney, a non-legal perspective. I would be surprised if suddenly uh, Hunter is charged with other related things with regard to how he got the money, and that's a big thing with Republicans. Like, oh well,
Hmm.
how did Hunter make this? How did he rack up this tax bill in the first place? I have to think that was something that the attorneys were looking into as they investigated this case.
Right. And Republicans on the House Oversight Committee say their investigation into both Hunter Biden, but now it seems that's really widened in focusing on these charges of bribery for then Vice President Biden, that those investigations will continue despite the criminal plea deal reached
Yeah,
by Hunter Biden.
and John, and one thing on that, and again, if people should be investigated, if they're doing something wrong or allegedly, yeah, let's find out if they're guilty or not. But remember, one of the criticisms that Republicans have of the Trump cases is that, well, you can't prosecute him because he's a candidate right now. He's a political opponent. You can't prosecute him. But yet, it's okay if Republicans investigate then Vice President Biden, now President, now candidate Biden. But hey, don't let hypocrisy get in the way of a good argument.
There you go. Earlier this week, Donald Trump sat down with Fox News' Bret Baier for a two-part interview that aired over the course of 2 nights. And they talked a lot about the documents situation, about the 2020 election, about Ukraine, about a number of other things. And just wanted to get a sense from, you're following the 2024 elections closely, the Republican primary field closely here. Have we seen what the Republican electorate, how they feel about the indictment, the aftermath following the indictment, some of these interviews that he's given, some of the things that he said? Has it had any kind of an impact in the polling or where you think the former president stands in terms of the folks who are trying to chase him down?
Well, first, in the context of the Republican primary, right? The first step to getting elected president is winning the nomination. I've seen no evidence that the indictment's legal struggles are hurting Trump among primary voters. I think voters and the Republican politicians have largely rallied to his defense, and I don't see that changing until proven otherwise. For example, I don't think that adding on another set of indictments from Georgia is suddenly going to be the game changer. That they're defending him on these other cases, but Georgia, oh no, that's a bridge too far. I anticipate that it would be in the same vein. And also, in the context of the primary, it's hard to see how he loses when some of his opponents are defending him on these charges or think it's a witch hunt, because he's ahead. He is the front runner. I would argue
Right.
he's the incumbent in the primary race. And in order for another Republican to win, Trump has to come down. And if you're not going to make the case to voters about why the front runner should not be the front runner, should not win, then he's going to win. And that is a very strange dynamic. Typically, John, if you're running in a campaign and your opponent is indicted, you should be rejoicing. You should be telling anyone you want, anyone who will listen about that. But that is not the case with Trump because these other candidates don't want to alienate his supporters.
Right. And
Let's talk.
there are some that are going after him here, though. I mean,
Yeah,
we've seen Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, couple of them.
Sure. Yeah. And Chris Christie is coming in hot, right? I mean, he is,
Yes.
I don't expect him to be the nominee, but he's going to have make his case. And in any debate stage that has the two of them, Trump and Christie on it, is going to be must watch television. Whether that message resonates, we'll have to figure out. And Christie, he's not going to have the resources of a Governor DeSantis or a Senator Tim Scott to make that case. He's going to have to largely do it in media interviews and in other creative ways. But right now, the front runners, the non-Trump front runners, aren't really making that direct case. They're trying to come at it the other way. But I also want to say, though, in the general election, I think that the legal problems for Trump are a problem. That Republicans have a problem with independent voters. And even though indictments might be helping Trump among the base, it can't be helping with independent voters. They can't feel like, oh, let me trust this man with another 4 years in office. It's a completely different calculation doing primary versus general election.
We've also seen more candidates enter the field. Two more candidates have entered the field in recent days. You had Miami Mayor Francis Suarez enter the race last week. And then this week you had former GOP Congressman Will Hurd jump into the fray here. And so now, at my last count, I think we're at 11 candidates, including Donald Trump, 10 challengers. And obviously, it seems as though, like you just mentioned, somebody who's as well established with as much name recognition as Chris Christie, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, these folks are not getting out of the single digits, and everybody knows who they are. And so I guess I'm curious, what is the rationale behind Will Hurd getting into the mix, behind Francis Suarez getting into the mix, Doug Burgum running for the White House? What kind of an effect? What are they hoping to accomplish here as they're jumping into the fray as well?
Well, first, I can't believe that you run for president unless you think there's a chance you're going to be elected president. I mean, I think you have to at least believe that to some extent. That being said, there are other reasons to run. You want to champion a cause. You want to raise your own profile to potentially run for something else or do something else. Get another job, just to have that be on a greater stage and platform and have that national name recognition, building that base. So there are things you can do. You can lose in the right way. At the same time, I think a lot of Republicans who maybe want to turn to a different chapter from Trump, have to be realizing that the more candidates that get into the race, the more likely we are headed down the 2016 path, where multiple non-Trump candidates divided up the non-Trump electorate and allowed Trump to slowly kind of work his way methodically through the primary. But he starts further ahead than what he did in 2016. Trump didn't have a majority of voters until maybe June.
Yeah,
maybe the beginning of June. Now, depending on the poll, Trump has a majority of Republican voters' support, if not maybe just a little bit less. So he's starting this race far ahead of everybody else, and everyone else is playing catch up.
Let's talk about the president's reelection campaign, because, everybody's focused on the GOP, and it certainly is the more interesting side to talk about because of all the candidates, because more people keep jumping in, and because we know who the Democratic nominee is going to be. It's going to be Joe Biden, barring something completely unforeseen over these next few months. But it doesn't sound like it's going to be a traditional campaign. It doesn't sound like there's going to be all kinds of rallies, and he doesn't have to go campaign in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, all these different early states where they're going to be primaries. He doesn't have to, he can kind of sit all of that out. But over the next few months, what do you think his campaign is going to look like?
One of the best things Biden can do for his reelection to being president is to be a good president. I mean, to show that he's doing a good job. Let's put it a different way. If you want to continue doing your job, prove that you're doing a good job right now, and hope that he is rewarded with 4 more years and with another term. Obviously, one of the major fights of this campaign will be whether he's doing a good job or not. But I think the case that President Biden and Democrats will make is that things are getting better. Sure, things may not be ideal, not where everyone wants, but things are getting better. That's part one of the message. Part two of the message is do you really want to go back? Do you really want President Trump back in charge for 4 more years? And what, do you trust him? And this is going to be, gosh, John, how pessimistic do we want to be on this? This will kind of be a fight between who is the most popular of the least popular candidates, of the least popular nominees. And that is, and Democrats it's a little bit of a risky proposition heading in, getting behind Biden in this reelection race, because they are going to have to rely on a group of voters who don't think Biden is doing a particularly good job. They're concerned about the direction of the country, and yet they are they're not comfortable with the alternative that Republicans are offering. This is the electorate that helped Democrats overperform in the midterm elections. They didn't like they thought Biden was doing a poor job, concerned about security and all those things, but they weren't comfortable voting for Republican candidates. So that's where nominating Trump is probably Biden's best case scenario, because it distracts from Biden's agenda, or he is so polarizing that it gives Biden a chance, even if Biden isn't popular.
I wanted to finish and ask you about something that you tweeted this week about newspapers and op-eds that I thought was a really interesting thought. And kind of along the lines of, we see Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, other newspapers, they publish these op-eds from people. And you tweeted something about not thinking that newspapers really shouldn't be doing that anymore. Can you kind of flesh that out a little bit?
Yeah, I don't often get on my stump, give my stump speech, but this is one of them. I'm, as a member of the media, I'm concerned about the lack of trust in the media. We could have 12 podcast episodes on this, but we have 2 minutes. But what I think would help is if newspapers and media outlets stop endorsing candidates and stop issuing editorials. These newspapers there is a wall. People may not believe it, but there is a wall between the people who are writing editorials, who are endorsing candidates, and the reporters who are reporting the news and writing the stories, and those editors. They don't talk about those things. There is a wall there, but I believe that most people don't believe that really exists. That if the editorial page is endorsing a candidate, then the reporters must be in the tank for that candidate. And so I think it would be easier, more clear if newspapers just did away with that tradition. I understand it's been 150 years the newspapers have been doing this. I just think it is for an era of the past. I'm not convinced that editorials really convince a lot of people, or media endorsements really help. I think it continues to hurt or feed the distrust in the media that already exists.
Yeah, and in the age of social media and the internet, all you have to do is go post a video on your Twitter feed or your Facebook page and get your message out that way. It does seem even an antiquated way of making your opinion known in this stage. I mean, back in those days when really all you had were newspapers and the 3 networks, that was a good way of getting your message out. But now there's so many more ways to just speak directly to people.
Right. Yeah, newspapers are not the gatekeeper that they once were. There are other ways to get familiar with the candidates, and newspapers should be doing reporting and analysis and helping voters get to know the candidates. I think just putting that thumb on the scale and saying, oh, you should support so-and-so for Congress or president or even mayor or city council, I just think it does more harm than good.
Well, you guys can catch Nathan Gonzales every week on Faith Nation on CBN, which can be found on our website, cbnnews.com. And you can also read his work at Inside Elections. Nathan, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
No problem. We'll see you next time.